Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Economic Development Project Team meeting on this lovely Tuesday. We have a number of items before us today with some updates, so I'll go ahead and get started with this. Commissioners, can we start with approval of our minutes? And these are the minutes from our July 11th meeting.
Support.
All right, moved and supported. Commissioners, any questions or comments on that?
No, I don't have any.
Okay. All right, that will move us right along to our Development Center report, which is in your packet.
All right. Well, thank you, Commissioners, Mayor, and City leadership here. It's a privilege to come and speak about the Development Center and give you the update for the last few months of our operations. The construction improvement that the community is experiencing is still continuing to stay high. In fact, we're trending above what we were at last year at this time. So it's exciting to see that we still are experiencing vibrant growth. This includes an increase in the number of housing units that we typically see in a year. So on average, we usually see about 500 new housing units. This year already we're at 730 new units. So that's really great to see. We are also, just kind of give an operation update, we are beginning a new customer service and collaborative effort with some of the larger construction projects that are going to be starting here in the city. Our building inspections team came up with the idea of kind of hosting a pre-construction collaboration consultation with them to kind of give them an update on some of the key codes and things that might impact their project so that future inspections as they go through the build go smoother. Also, we are seeking on expanding our staff. We're currently seeking additional planning staff to help support with plan review and expedite the reviews faster. So, a few notable projects just to kind of bring your attention to that we approved last month. The Kent County Waste and Energy Facility has begun renovations to their plant. The East Point Commons project, which is a LIHTC project on East Fulton, was issued last month, which brought 118 new units to the city. And then Boston Square Early Learning Collaborative Center was issued last month as well. And with that, I'll open up to any questions.
Great, thank you. I have a few I'll start with, and then I'll turn to my colleagues. So one, just to make sure that we all are aware of the data in front of us. For the construction report, the 2002, that's for the entire year, correct?
That is correct.
Or 22,
22 is calendar year, yep.
Is calendar year, and then year to date. And we don't have a comparison for 22 year to date versus 23 year to date?
No, but I can add that to future reports if that's of interest. So
yeah, it just would be nice to track to see if we're ahead of where we were last year.
Absolutely.
So if you can, if it's not too hard, that would be great. And then two other questions. For the East Point Commons, do you recall the timeline on when they will be finished with that?
Unfortunately, I don't, but I can look that up and get that to you when I get back. So that's all on the application record.
Commissioner, do you know, it's been vacant a long time, but
Yeah.
two, I know that there's permanent supportive housing as a part of that project, and we know that there's a huge need for that right now.
I don't remember what the timeline is, but they did just send out something around a tour and kind of looking at some things, so I can take a look at it and confirm.
Okay.
Just saw that this week.
And then my last question, I'm glad to hear that we're looking at adding some staff. I'm curious, what is the current average turnaround time
Yep.
for
Go ahead, sorry.
permits?
Yep, so right now we are averaging about 45 days from the time we get the permit application in to issuance. Most of the departments that are responsible for reviews average about 5 to 6 days per turnaround, with a few divisions like planning that are taking a little bit longer due to the nature and complexity of the review. So that's where the additional planning staff should help address some of that delay.
Okay, good. I mean, it's a good problem to have. We're glad that we're getting applications and that we're seeing development. With that said, I think I'm not the only one that has heard that it's taking longer and it's a little bit more difficult to get through departmental approvals. So I'm glad to hear that. Good. Commissioners, additional questions? Commissioner Robbins?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just had a quick follow-up question on the turnaround time. How does that compare historically to where our turnaround times have been or to other communities of similar size?
From what I can tell from previous years, we're staying about average. Sometimes, it depends on the project and what we receive, but, it's been about this since I've came to the department about 3 years ago. But I can definitely pull a report on the historic nature of it all and get that to you as well. As far as it relates to other departments, from what I've been told, I haven't done the research. We are still one of the quicker turnarounds out there, but I don't have the data really to support that at this time.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I think our planning director wants to respond
All
to
right.
that.
I would as well,
I remember
Mayor.
turnaround times when I was commissioner. I think they were quite a bit quicker.
Yeah, I'm certainly, the past couple of years have been more challenging for us to meet the metrics that we had established previously with the volume of work and the complexity of the work. Relative to other communities, I realize that it is a slowdown compared to maybe what we were able to achieve back in 2015, for example. We have very positive feedback, especially from out-of-state developers. When they find out that it takes an average of a couple of months compared to years in other communities, or 6 to 8 months in other communities. So the feedback, I think, we've been spoiling maybe some of our local or regional developers that they're used to very quick turnaround due to our processes, which we're proud of and we want to continue to support. But when you look at our metrics compared to other similar sized cities around the country, we far exceed that.
Great, thanks. Commissioners, other questions?
No, actually, Mayor, I do have an East Point Commons question. So about a year from today will be construction complete.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And that's all, and that's not phased in?
No, that's also a RAP 1.0 supported project as well, the RAP grant. Yep.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, very helpful. Commissioner?
Mayor, just a point. I think sometimes we hear, in the news or a headline about sort of relocation of organizations. So just like in the Third Ward, wanted to note the 1040 4th Street, where, American Seating was moving from one part of the city, but to another part. So I think even just kind of knowing that people may move, obviously needs change, but glad to see that they will continue to be in the city, so.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. All right, any additional questions or comments, City Manager?
Yeah, Mayor, in response to a couple of the comments I heard today, the first relative to last year, while not year-to-date, if you look at the 2022 investment of $448 million and where we are through July, this is through the end of July?
Correct.
That is about 70% of the value of last year. And just from a year-to-date perspective, we're 58% of the year. So we're ahead of schedule in terms of the volume from last year, but it would be nice to know if there's any seasonal fluctuations that we can see if there's going to be a last quarter, trend of slowing down, but very encouraging. And that's what I've noted, that this early in the year, that much volume and investment. And the last, I was trying to pull it up, but I think maybe by the end of the meeting, those metrics that we have about our permitting and processing time, we report every year as part of our performance metrics of our strategic plan. So we'll pull that up and see how we compare based on previous years.
Yeah, thanks, City Manager. And I agree. If I recall, typically come November, December, we start to see a slowdown with the holiday.
That is correct, yeah. Usually by the time the holidays start, we see a slowdown, so. But this does kind of still put us above trend for where we were last year, which is still good to see. So.
It's great to see. It's great to see. All right, Commissioners, any additional questions or comments? All right, thanks for your work.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, next that will take us to a presentation by our partners over at the Urban League, talking about the Black Business Voice presentation. So who should I turn to, City Manager, for this? Do you want to kick us off?
I will start with Mr. Grassi, and then I'll have some comments before our presenters come.
Okay.
Yes, well, good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. So what is before us is a body of work that has taken place over the last 6-7 months, but obviously has been a discussion in the community for a number of years. And so in December of 22, we adopted a resolution to support the partnership with the Urban League of West Michigan to complete this work in the development and creation and implementation plan to create the amplify the African American business voice in Grand Rapids. And so that work has been taking place in earnest in the last 6 months. And I have personally been able to connect with Mr. Brown on a regular basis, if not monthly, at least every other week, as we go to this work, and many other partners that are part and will be recognized and supporting today. I want to recognize the work that they've done. It's been a huge lift. It's been a enjoyable process for me to learn more about the Black business voice, and also grow my personal relationship with many of the partners that were part of this work. And it's important, and we want to make sure we report the outcomes today, and I think you'll be pleased with the organization that they have and strategy they put together today. We know it's not the end of the conversation. We'll continue that, but I'll turn over to the city manager to provide any other additional comments before we turn over to Mr. Brown.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Grassi. I think we have a lot of organizations that have represented the voice of the African American community in different ways, from nonprofits to faith-based organizations. And I think when it comes to the business community, unlike other groups that represent on a macro level, whether it's the Hispanic Chamber or the Asian Chamber or even the Grand Rapids Chamber, there has been a lot of different efforts within the African American community. At one point, my understanding is that this community did have a Black chamber and still does have a license for a Black Chamber of Commerce, but the engagement or activation of it lately has not been what it once was. And so with the various conversations we've had in the community about the wealth gap and ensuring inclusion, economic inclusion consistent with our strategic plan, we have been on this road to try to better align the voices in the African American community around economic opportunities. And I think people refer to the Forbes study that occurred years ago and rated Grand Rapids in its ability to include African American businesses. And I'm hoping what you'll hear today is that not only are there efforts to ensure that there's more inclusive economic prosperity, but I certainly am looking forward to re-inviting Forbes to reevaluate our community along those lines. And you'll hear that after the presentation from our staff as well. And also, I think, at least since my arrival in October, it'll be almost 5 years, and I've had various conversations around this topic, whether it has been from the group that petitioned the city commission some time ago, that was EPIC, I think it was, and the conversations with Legacy and Love, and now the African American Task Force, all have centered around the same topic. How can we have better organization and inclusion? And there's also conversations within the community now with the Opportunity for All initiative. I see Ms. Weather O'Neill here as well, who has been working along the same topic. And what you'll hear is from our partners at the Urban League, how do we coalesce all these conversations together to have more synergy and better outcomes. So with that, I'll turn it over to our partners, Mr. Brown and Mr. Brown. Which Brown is going to go first?
All right. Well, I'll welcome both of you, and you can tag team up there however you see fit. And I just want to start off just by saying thank you for all of your work. I know I've met with both of you, and you know how important this initiative is to this entire city commission and our entire community. So eager to hear what you have to share with us today.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Washington.
I think you may need to push a button on the red button. There you go.
Oh, okay. Thanks again, Mayor Bliss and Mr. Washington and the Economic Development Committee. I do want to start by lifting up Jeremiah in his work with us. Jeremiah has done a tremendous job of engagement from the Office of Economic Development and has been really intentional with us in putting this framework together. So just by way of background, how we got here. And as Mr. Washington entered Grand Rapids 3 years after the Forbes report inherited some challenges around the institutional blockages or gaps that exist in this community as it relates to opportunities for the African American community and other disadvantaged groups. And so as Mark entered into Grand Rapids, we immediately started to work with Mr. Washington to do some of those things that was happening in the city he came from, Austin, Texas, that we know is a fairly progressive community. We know that with the gaps that exist in our community around economic opportunity, and as the data reflects, we have a lot of work to do. And we think that this framework that we've put together is a part of that work to help to close these gaps. Some of the outcomes that we were looking for is to lift up, as Mr. Washington shared, the voices of Black businesses and the agency of Black business here in Grand Rapids. We knew that's legacy and love and a few machinations that we had in terms of organizers, Grand Rapids African American Community Task Force, certainly our partners at Michigan Black Expo, and as Mr. Brown will speak to in his presentation, a lot of other partners that are part of this collaborative now. But the collaborative engagement was critically important to us to put a framework together that we can, with these outcomes, Black agency and voice, collaborative engagement, and collective impact. We think that we've created a framework for a community accountability partnership that we're in with the city, whereby we can deep dive this data, be very intentional about our work. We know that within this ecosystem, there's a lot happening, a lot of moving parts. And so again, we've had a machination or two. We're going to call it an evolution of this work, where we think we're fairly grounded with a great framework that you're going to see today. I want to add as well that we'll be sharing this framework with the community on Monday, August 28th at Wealthy Theater at 6 p.m. And a lot of our partners and collaborators will be there as well. So again, on behalf of the Grand Rapids African American Community Task Force, Legacy and Love, led by Mr. and Mrs. Johnny and Sini Jordan, and the rest of our partners, as we center our work with the Center for Community Economic Development and Success with the Urban League. With that, I'd like to introduce our partner in this work, Mr. Eric Brown. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. All right, I think we're ready to rock and roll. Appreciate that. Appreciate Rodney lifting up the voices of some of those that have started this work again, as Mr. Washington said about 5 years ago. We were brought to the table probably a little bit over a year ago, around a year ago now, in discussions with city around these same things, and that evolved into working with the city over the last handful of months to produce this framework. And thank you for having us, and thank you for lifting this up. I honestly believe that inclusive economic growth is the #1 imperative for our city and our region to reach its maximum economic output potential. So we're just going to a brief agenda today. We'll talk, and it'll be mixed in through there, past, present, and future. And then we'll talk about the conceptual framework that Mr. Brown spoke of and the Black Business Voice and Advisory Initiative. Right here, these are just some of the things that we lifted out wanted to recognize the city of Grand Rapids' commitment to economic inclusive growth. However, we do know that, as Mr. Brown alluded to, things in writing, we got to make sure that they come to fruition. So that's why we're eager to be in this partnership with the city. But just different things, I won't recount and read them, but from the vision, the mission, the values, and then even a wonderful statement from our esteemed mayor, where it talks about without racial equity, we cannot be prosperous, and then even incorporation of the GARE toolkit. Although the city is interested in, and definitely we believe sincere about achieving racial equity when it comes to economic inclusive growth, we do believe we have still the tale of two cities. Back in the strategic plan, there were at least 15 recognitions, and there could have been more as far as the top 10 or top place in the country to do this or that. However, As it's been mentioned, the Forbes article has us next to the bottom. And then the Kellogg report even talks about what could happen, a little bit more aspirationally about what could happen if we were to solve for racial disparities, what can happen economically to the tune of $92 billion a year on an annual basis. Basically, we wanted to, and during our research during this project, we ran across some good framework for rewiring systems for inclusive economic growth that were put forth by Brookings Metro. It's a framework that talks about understanding systems, intervening in systems, and then measuring systems. So that's kind of the approach that we're taking. We recognize that there's no comprehensive list of current business exists. As a matter of fact, the conversation earlier today talked about that very thing, about what the list, and we do know that we have partners that specifically work around that, but it's very difficult to come up with a comprehensive list with good contact information. We know that Grand Rapids population is around 18%, and we know that Black business ownership is well below 18% in disparate fashion. And then even in that, Black businesses within Grand Rapids are almost exclusively in the non-employer realm of things. In other words, very small businesses, sole proprietors and the such. Matter of fact, in 2017, as I cite a few of these things, it's hard for Grand Rapids to get down to the granular data of Black business. So some of this seems to be a little bit dated, but it's the data that we have to work with, and we'll talk a little bit more about data towards the end. But in 2017, there were only 131 firms in all of the greater Grand Rapids MSA that were owned by Blacks that employed others. Within that, Black businesses are concentrated, highly concentrated in lifestyle and difficult to scale industries. So if we're talking about growing economically and regionally, you have to be able to scale these businesses. They are concentrated in transportation, other services except public administration, and healthcare and social assistance. Again, we a lot of times refer to these as lifestyle type of businesses that are highly service intensive, very difficult to scale. And those account for about 50% of the Black businesses that are owned, that exist, compared to only 26% for non-Black businesses. So we need a shift. We need to shift from majority lifestyle businesses to businesses that are more easy to scale so that we can have the economic prosperity that we're all looking for. We need to shift from transportation, other services, and healthcare into professional, scientific, and technology jobs, industries, construction, and real estate, and rental and leasing. There's definitely the ability to shift to those type of businesses. So what have we done to date? Mr. Grassi talked a little bit about this, but we've hosted at least 2 formal focus groups, countless conversations around Black business growth and development, economic development. And we're engaged with 11 Black-led ESOs, BSOs, and EDOs, or entrepreneur support organizations, business support organization, or economic development organizations. And a handful of them are here with me today. And when we get a little bit further, I'll just have them stand to be recognized. Several of them had other commitments, engagements. It is August in West Michigan, so it is a big time for vacation as we get back to school. So several of them wish they could be here, but we're not able to do so. We had a Black on the Block event, which was attended, well attended. We were able to find and locate several new Black businesses, and as well as we had visitors from our city, some of our city departments to be able to share some of the services that were out there. We had surveys, and then, as Mr. Brown said, on August 28th, 6 o'clock, we'll be having a community report out. We'll talk more about inviting the city and their various departments to be present and be able to share at that time. We've developed this consortia, possibly roundtable model. It has been conceptualized, and we'll present that in just a second. And then we have a database that's constantly growing, and we want it to be a living database in order that it can be relevant, of 260, just under 270 businesses, with 66 of them, the information being confirmed and verified. It's very frustrating to have a list and with contact information that is not current and great. So we're going through the painstaking process of reaching out to those business owners. And then our engagement plan. This is an ongoing partnership, as has been talked about. I think we're done with what we're calling phase 1, and looking forward to move on to phase 2 as far as moving on with this engagement plan. So this is the framework that we've been talking about. Right now, it's temporarily being called the Black Business Voice and Advisory Consortia. We've kind of put a pause once we got the framework together because we want those that are listed here to be able to have say in some of the things that are going on so they can have that collaborative and collective process that we're all looking at. But everything in red you can really look at as the consortia. They're listed entity. I wanted to recognize, we want to keep that there's individual organizations within this, but yes, and still we're working in this consortia. My presentation skills aren't great to be able to have it presented in a better way, but everything in red is together. This work will likely be held and led at the Urban League of West Michigan in our Center for Economic Success and Development. But again, we're partnering with all those organizations that you see listed there that have agreed to sign on to work in the areas, and this is from our focus groups, that there's opportunities in marketing, mentorship, and advocacy for us to grow Black Business Voice. And again, let me pause for a second. When we're talking about Black Business Voice, we'll recognize that there won't be one singular voice, but this will be the voice that can be gone to in the event. I remember last time I was here presenting, there was a development that was happening, and they talked about 14% or so of participation, and that had been vetted to the tune of 14% to the tune of $9 million. They had been vetted with the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and the Hispanic Center. No mention of any Black-led organizations that their engagement plan had been vetted with. So this is, again, another reason why this consortia is very much needed. There is a little bit of a continuum there with the growing size of the arrows. So we kind of looking at it from the start of the 250 to $1 million, and then 1 million to 5 million plus. And you notice that there's gaps listed under the two different categories, there's agreement amongst the 11 that there are gaps within the ecosystem that are preventing these businesses from growing and scaling. I mentioned the areas that we're going to collaborate on. Most is going to be not most, but these are the three that rose to the top from our initial research is marketing, mentorship, and advocacy. Within marketing, mentorship, and advocacy, I'll go into a little detail, but the little triangles down there saying that we're still in the process as we're identifying the systems or intervening in systems, who's going to provide what. So all those entities there, they're doing something already in the space, and where they're going to continue to do that, that will be lifted up collectively and collaboratively, but we're still mapping that out and who's going to do that work. And a couple of things for us to keep in mind, which is the conference and forum, basically communicating with our partners, communicating with the community as far as what's going on with this and how it's going to benefit the community and the businesses as well. KPIs and goals, as we talk about measuring systems, identifying the KPIs and goals, and then ultimately our intention is to reduce and hopefully eliminate the racial wealth gap that is prevalent on everybody's mind within what's going on. So a little bit about the marketing and mentorship. This is an ideal to keep spaces, create spaces within the ecosystem where people that would likely not come together can come together around several things. Moving on, it's why the Urban League, our Center for Success and Development. We're looking to assist aspiring entrepreneurs to navigate the entrepreneurial system. That's one thing that has risen up very much, that it's hard to navigate a daunting system, and like a lot of times people are doing this after they're working a full-time job, et cetera, and provide one-on-one coaching with business owners. That was another need that's been lifted up through our work, to say that they need somebody to walk them along with the process, to provide twofold matchmaking. Again, this is within that marketing, mentoring, and advocacy. When I say twofold matchmaking, of course, matchmaking with buyers of goods and services and their procurement folks, as well as those that provide it, but also identifying individuals or groups that are interested in becoming entrepreneurs and business owners, finding the people that are interested in working with them to provide capital, and be able to match them with businesses that are actually legacy businesses that are out there for sale in the marketplace. And then provide coaching and preparedness for capital, and then connect companies with those sources of capital. As you all know, we also have that covered as we're in the final stages of trying to get our CDFI up and running, that we have under in partnership with National Urban League. We're likely going to call that the Capital Access Fund of West Michigan. Talked about this already. So that's a little bit, we're trying to create those, again, those intentional spaces that don't exist right now, and which are blocking a lot of the progress that we need to have blocked, as well as advocating and with public entities like yourself, Kent counties and others for policies, procedures, and engagement, and private companies as well. Some examples of best practices in our research for the inclusive, those cities that are at the top of the inclusive cities around the country. We do want to shout out our own city with the Mentor Protege and Business Program and the bid discounts. We think that's a very well helping with the process here. However, we would like to add to that some things that we've seen from Kansas City, San Antonio, and Austin. Kansas City, they have a KC Bids Care where they have forms that are specific around engaging with the city, permitting, licensing, what you have to do in order to do business with the city of Grand Rapids, San Antonio, or Kansas City in their respect. We'd love to see that here. Capacity and bonding assistance program. We think this can really help out transitioning a lot of those businesses into, or growing businesses into construction. Down in San Antonio, Texas, where it's probably about, I just left, and it's probably about 115 degrees, very hot. But they have a capacity and bonding assistance program. Companies, business owners go through specific training. And what it does, that opens them up to a pool, a revolving fund of $500,000 that they can use for bonding and capacity related issues. And then down in Austin, Texas, we're familiar with Austin. They have specially educational workshops that they do on a monthly or bi-monthly basis around various topics in economic growth for the businesses. Again, specifically with engaging with Austin, Texas, but also outside of there. So we have an ask that we're going to go to wrap this presentation up. But one thing I do want to mention before we go there is our target is, again, obviously, how can we increase doing business with the city of Grand Rapids? What are the changes that the city can do? We appreciate the city and a lot that they have in writing. We want to help out do that. But we also want to be able to do this with other government entities, other anchor organizations, and private industry as well. We want to start here, but we know regional economic growth will not just end here, but we are looking with the city to lead in that respect. That being said, we would love to we are asking for a 5-year commitment, engagement, consistency with the master plan. We cannot redress decades, centuries worth of these injustices that have happened in just a few months that we've been doing this work. It's going to take much longer than that, and we're asking for that. Funding, obviously this can't be done. There needs capacity and resources to be able to do this work for the things that have been mentioned before, so I won't go now, but case management, capacity and bonding, and grants. There's opportunity to provide this funding from public, private, and philanthropic partnership. Again, I'll end where I started, whereas because I think that inclusive economic regional growth is the most important imperative for us to become the city region economically that we all desire to do, so that we can all prosper. Thank you. And, yeah.
I think City Manager wants to make a few comments, and then I'll open it up for questions from my colleagues.
Yep. So again, I want to thank all of our partners and members of the community for being here today. I would do a couple of things. I'd like to, first of all, again, go back to slide 11 on the presentation and on those examples that they noted around the country. And I think what distinguishes us from those other communities is the fact that in each of those other cities, 3 of the 4, there is a full-time regional, not neighborhood, not ward, not district, but regional Black-led economic development organization that is looking at issues at the city, the county, and state level, looking at regional infrastructure projects, transportation projects, housing developments in the area, and not just in one city, to your point. And historically, those have been the Black Chamber of Commerce. Now, what we have is a very federated model, but there is not one organization whose sole purpose, day in, day out, is looking at the regional interests without particular interest to the organization, but to benefit the members of the organization. So there's no profit incentive or gain for the organization looking at it, but for the sole benefit representative of the member. And while we have very many good people in the space, there is a need, and the reason why we're here if we're going to change our national statute in terms of how we compare, we have to use some of the similar approaches that I think that are being utilized in some of those other communities. Secondly, I do think that the alarm that was set in 2015, and we can have the staff come back with this report, the things that have been done to address the concerns, whether it is from the Third Ward Equity Program to the $40 million plus and now measurable infrastructure investments we have in our annual budget, to our Development Center Ombudsman to help new businesses navigate the permitting process, to the vision of the river inclusive economic opportunity for the river redevelopment for the River for All, where we are committing, where we've just pledged to ensure that 30% of those contracts are obligated to MWE and MWB businesses, as well as the other intentionality that we've done with our own city contracts. We've quadrupled the number of MLB registered vendors. I would like the effort that was used for a report card in 2015 from Forbes that this community has held as a wake-up call to be remeasured again. And I've asked the members of that group, I've asked our staff to reach out to Forbes and tell them that we are very interested in having them reevaluate this community to see where we stand at this point. And what I'd like to, if the commission, this team permits, to get an update at least from the staff on that effort. And then I've asked Mr. Brown in the future work to partner with us to get that remeasurement. So I think Mr. Green is here just to give a brief update on what has been done in contacting Forbes.
So yes, so as the manager outlined, in 2015, what Forbes actually published was a summary of a study that was done by an academic. He looked at four primary factors, and we can go much deeper into that. In the time, shortly after I arrived, there was this question whether or not the significant amount of resources and movement and city policy adjustments that have been made were actually making an appropriate impact. I've reached out several times myself, as well as a couple of our city executives have reached out, and we've been unable to garner any interest from the individual who originally did that study. However, in digging through the study, we do believe that it will be possible to replicate that study. And so right now what we're doing is we're looking primarily locally, but if not locally, somewhere else within the state or within the country, to do a replication of that study so we can get a true, accurate measure if the efforts that we're doing have been successful and if they are indeed achieving the desired outcomes and goals as dictated by that original outline. So the data does exist. We do believe, though, that it is important that we go out and we partner with an appropriately trained academic that can really do this work and bring it back to us as a third-party, unbiased look at whether or not we've moved the needle in any of these areas.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Green. The city manager touched on a comment I wrote during the presentation, and it is around data. And I appreciate that KPIs is one of the goals that you're working on. But my hope is that we come up with some good data resources that we can track regularly so that we can identify, what are we doing that's having a direct impact, and where are we spending time and money and resources, and maybe it's not having an impact and we need to stop doing that and put more effort over here, knowing that that's what's really having a larger impact. And it is, I'm sure you share my frustration in not having access to good data that we can take a look at. And so to me, that also needs to be a priority.
The list, is there currently a listing of all the African-American businesses? I know you've been working on it, but you gave a update a couple days ago that you began an inventory And can you share a little bit more about the status of the inventory?
So as we, I'll start there, and there's a couple other things I'd love to respond to. 269 is where we're at right now. We want that list we want to continually be mining for that list. And we believe as we do this work and as we get more out there in the public's eye, that we'll be able to have businesses that will make sure that they are on that list. Again, like I said, we're vetting that. Interesting thing is we did our analysis on this, I believe, the 66, and the percentages that I alluded to of how they break down in a lifestyle. It was almost right on point with what the global or the national percentages were of how things break down. So that was interesting and telling in and of itself. That's a project, again, in order to continue that work, there has to be capacity and resources to continue that work. But that was a list that was compiled from several fragmented lists that we were able to find out there, and then through our own efforts of promoting, hey, if you have a black business, please sign up for this list. That's how we arrived at the 269 and counting.
Okay, I'm going to turn to Commissioner Sassi, but I'm curious if once you have that list finalized, if you can share it with the commission.
Well, we definitely, yes, that's part of our engagement is to share that list. So we'll just get it cleaned up a little bit, and we'll share with you guys where we're at right now, and then we'll talk further on that. We are eager to help with the data collection, data identification process, as well as I referenced. And the only way we're going to know if we have success in rewiring any type of systems is if we're measuring that. So as far as revising or reproducing the 2015 Forbes report, as well as what data may or may not need to be included in that as we go forward, and regular reporting. We're definitely, we want to make sure that there is equitable data collection, analysis, and reporting on that information, where we definitely are included in doing that. And you mentioned the river restoration work. I do have to lift up river. Many of you guys are very familiar with Black Voices at the River, and that's a big time work led by Johnny Jordan with Love and Legacy and others in that group. But that they've done a lot of work. Kareem Scales is here now, and there was a lot of people in those partnership with helping that. I do commend the city for the 30%. That's huge, and we just definitely want to make sure that we get there.
Thank you. Commissioner Sassi, and then Commissioner Robbins.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation, Mr. Brown and all those that are in the audience. It's nice to see a lot of people that we see regularly and not so regularly. I too had the question about data. How do we pull in lists from the state level? I think this has also been, last week I think was like Buy in Michigan, which is not quite as disaggregated around black businesses, but we have seen that disaggregation at the state level, and we've been successful, I think, with those efforts. Getting listings of different LLCs, who's getting different funds as it relates, with some of these catalytic dollars that Mr. Gracia mentioned in the first part, as well as sort of cross-referencing this with our MLBE list and sort of saying where are those opportunities. I also know one of board trustee from GRPS, Kimberly Williams, has approached me and others about contracts that they also have. How can we better connect with, obviously, these large institutions? Certainly bonding is a large issue when we think about some of the government contracts. I know there is also some proposed rule changes with some of the government bonding pieces. I serve on Representative Skolton's Small Business Advisory Board, and that was discussed quite a bit about some of the. My mic's on.
No.
Oh, sorry. I was like, am I talking loud enough? I think I am. And so what are some of those? I think that advocacy piece, I wanted to bring that up. So there have been some of those rules with the SBA that do need to get adjusted. I also think on the federal level, there has, for a number of the programs in the SBA, particularly veterans, women. So, right, again, we're talking about black businesses, but we also know, I think it goes back and forth, black women, Latinas who are starting businesses at the highest rates. And so, again, disaggregating that, some of the investments on the national level, it's 5 people for one department. So I think there's definitely an opportunity on the advocacy side, both statewide and federal. I also wanted to lift up, so that's not really a question, I guess that's a comment, Mr. Brown. I also wanted to lift up, I think many people are familiar with the Cincinnati Minority Business Collaborative. That's another good framework that I know, I think Kellogg has made some national investments in, and I know groups of individuals have gone there to look at that collaborative. So I wanted to lift them up as well. And Cincinnati is not too far from Grand Rapids, so Texas is a little bit further. So I wanted to highlight that. And then, couldn't agree more with how do we shift, right? I think there'll always be a need from a lifestyle perspective, but I absolutely agree. We're going to be thinking about generational wealth. We're going to be thinking about, adding more jobs to the economy. It is going to be shifting. I think our highest industries continue to be construction, healthcare, and manufacturing in this region. Is that still right, Mr. Gracia? And so how do we make sure if that is happening, and those are the highest, how do we map into that area? So I couldn't agree with you more on that. I think it would be great to hear more about, obviously looking at the listing piece, but it would be great to know also from that CDFI perspective, what are the types of, products that you are looking to offer? Because I think there can be some good connection and coordination. I know, Mayor, you've had some recent conversations about CDFIs as well. And many businesses may receive funding from a CDFI, receive a grant, receive that stat capital, as well as hopefully into some banking pieces. And I know there is definitely at least one regional or national bank here that's in our state looking to make some new investments in business banking. So how do we kind of hold them to wanting to be part of this work as well? And then I think the last thing I would say is to that last slide that you have on that ask. And so I just want to make sure I understand what that ask is. Obviously sometimes we don't necessarily make decisions in this project team meeting, but knowing what that ask would be, because obviously I know you have the funding from the CDFI, which came from the ARPA dollars from the county, but I'm guessing you also have some other money that, given that this is core work for the Urban League, you probably have some other money, and then how do we fit into that? That would be helpful for me to understand how that funding is braided and try to figure out how we best, structure that if that's a road that we go down, to understand sort of where our investment is, and all of that. So those are my thoughts and comments.
Do any time for me to respond right now?
Yes, I know we have one more item on our agenda.
Sorry.
To get to before this meeting is over, and then we have a 2:00 meeting as well. So, City Manager, how much time left on this?
I can wrap it in 2 minutes.
Okay. Yes, go ahead and answer. I'll turn to Commissioner Robbins, and then I'll button this up so we can move to the next item. Why don't we go to Commissioner Robbins, and then I'll have Mr. Brown finish up.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, nice to meet you, and thanks for this information. It's incredibly helpful. I did have just two really quick questions. One maybe just for this body, or it could be a follow-up with the staff, and then one for you. But in terms of tracking the data, that was the first thing that I wrote down too. Are there capabilities with the new ERP implementation? I know we're considering using that for the minority contractor type thing. So wondering if there's any capabilities possible or overlap with just more data capturing within this conversation. So that's one question. And then second of all, too, I know with the Forbes study, and I remember when that came out as well, I think there's certainly a lot of value in recreating that to see the progress that has been made over the past 8 years. But also curious, too, if there's other studies out there that we might look at just to ensure that the methodology we're using is best encompasses, I guess, our community, just so we kind of have more than one point of comparison beyond just this one study that was published.
So, Yeah, real quick, because I said I'll do it in 2 minutes. Yep, the first question is definitely for them. And just on the data piece, I won't even go there because it's so much there and it's come up a little bit. And we do know that that's very critical. It's imperative to the success of this. We are definitely looking forward to more conversation around the data. What other data out there should we be reporting on, the relevancy? I talked about measuring systems. We have the ESG framework from the from the public companies. There's a lot of different things specifically around economic development. I know Kellogg has 2 reports 2018, 2016, 17 that have a lot of good data specifically about black business. Mr. Washington, appreciates you lifting up the fact that, in these other regions, and the crazy thing, the top 10 regions of all places, they're in the South. There's no top 10 regions for black business in the Midwest at all. They're in the South, maybe DMV area, and then maybe one or two out west. So there's something to be said about that, but that there is no full-time organization here in West Michigan that's devoting to this, because that's a lot. It's a very, very heavy lift as we're talking about going to these data and these strategies and things. So yeah, we don't have a full-time entity doing that. Quite honestly, Ms. Yasasi, I forgot what I was going to respond to you, but I know we'll have great opportunity. Oh, CDFI. CDFI, we're going to be lending, you generally at the smaller amounts that are missed out by a lot of other in lower rates. None of that's confirmed yet. That's why I'm talking a little bit vague, but I do know that in my talks that we're going to be less than most CDFIs because of our excess of funds have cost zero. So that's going to be passed along to the business owners. And as far as operating funds within that, we're working with the county on where there's allowance for those things. We all know CDFIs really aren't money makers. You really there's a lot of other fundraising and stacking and all that has to go around with that. But as far as from operating and bringing those other funds in, really nothing there. Most of this work is done out of our one event a year, which is the MLK. And so we've got to fund a lot of areas that we don't get funding for through our MLK, which honestly gives us a fraction of what we're able, what we really need to do, as well as, again, in the framework that's not up there. Urban League is leading the work, but we are still working with these other 10 organizations and supporting in their work that we're not currently supporting. I don't want my words to get misconstrued, but in the consortium model, we're looking to bring in funding that, yes, will be led and funneled through the league, but also that we're able to, there's specialties within those organizations that we want to keep with them and to be able to lift them up to do it, so that along that continuum, we're accomplishing what we want to accomplish. Sorry, that went a little bit more than 2 minutes. But y'all remember last time, I got like 3 minutes and the folks before me got like 45. We were talking about equity, but to wrap it up, great questions. I love it. I'm excited to keep this conversation going forward. I think it's imperative for our region, not only around economic development, but if we think about a lot of things, cure violence, health, a lot of things are connected to economic prosperity. And if we can solve for this, or at least partially solve for this, I think we can have that reaching into some of these other areas that we have to spend other monies for.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. Well, we appreciate your partnership and all the other partners that we have in the room with us right now.
Madam Mayor, I'll be remiss if I did not have those that are listed, Spring GR, African Connection. Can y'all stand when I call your name
So
out?
all of our partners, why don't you stand
why don't
up
y'all
so that
stand?
we can appreciate you.
Dr. King, our homegrown neurosurgeon.
Wow.
Along with them, we had seven of the Black Grand Valley's HSI, HBCU initiative. We had 7 of them working with us during this process. Several of them are already looking to stay here. One's already set up shop here. So as far as the retention, an attraction program, as we make this a place where everybody feels like they belong, we're going to be able to retain people and attract people to this region, so that's going to support the economic growth too. So thank you all for coming out today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your work and your partnership. And also thank Teresa Weatherall-Neal, who is with us today, doing great work in many of these spaces. So
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Urban League and others are also partners in the work that we're doing around housing. So as we look at wealth generation and building wealth in our community, absolutely it's business ownership and economic opportunity, but it's also very much tied to home ownership and housing as well. So our next topic that we are going to probably try to get it done within 15 minutes if we can get through. I know this was already presented to the Brownfield Authority, but I want to make sure that we have time to really think through some of the legislative changes and how they impact our local policies to make sure that we are aggressively coming up with some local changes to start to use these really valuable economic tools to support housing and home ownership here in our city.
Mayor, before Mr. Kosher goes, I'd like to call a couple important items. So, as you know, this has been a specific policy a priority for the city of Grand Rapids, and as we're addressing housing, and this Brownfield Authority work has been going on for at least a couple years. And I want to thank a couple folks in other departments that have helped do this. One, Ms. Karen Farrick, who's in the back, who's tracked this very closely over the last few months as the legislative changes were going through very rapidly. Obviously, the mayor, you've had an opportunity to testify through this process. And also our economic development team, who has been tracking this very, very closely. In fact, with Ms. Farrick's assistance, has also an opportunity to testify and provide direct commentary into the legislative changes that were adopted. So there was a lot of influence and a lot of expertise that was looked at across the state to Grand Rapids to ensure that this policy changes were as broad and impactful as they could be. And I know that Mr. Kosher spent a lot of time on weekends and nights that looking through this policy and counseling with me and talking about how we would most effectively leverage that. And even as this legislation is passed in July, our team is meeting weekly to talk about all the questions that we're going to talk about today that was presented at the Brownfield Authority to make sure that we can utilize this program and have the most impactful outcomes and focused, intentional outcomes that we can through this legislation. So we've gotten here with a lot of back end room work and a lot of other interdepartmental work that is really, really important to understanding what a simple legislative change can do and how that is implemented, because there is a lot of detail that goes into that and implications for staffing, resourcing, tracking to get the outcomes that I know that this city wants. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Kloster.
All right.
Thank you.
Ms. Klooster.
Yep, and I have to admit here, I was intending to only cover the first item on this agenda here. I was hoping to have Mr. Kilpatrick here as well, but fortunately, a lot of this is from slides you've already seen. Commissioner Sassi got this exact same presentation on the board, and I know Brownfield Authority and Mayor, you were there too, so I can run through much of this very quickly. But here's the topics we'll cover. Briefly on the legislative amendments, so where we're starting with, right, the legislation, and then policy can deal with it from there. Basically, at a high level, I like to talk about the Brownfield program as having eligible property and eligible activity costs. And if you have eligible activity costs on an eligible property, you have a Brownfield project. Both of those were expanded through this legislation. So eligible property definition had the housing property added. So basically any property where housing is proposed to be constructed or rehabilitated. And then housing development activities, those eligible activities were significantly expanded as well. A host of costs associated with housing projects are now eligible, including even filling a financing gap, so not even really connected to the construction of a project. I've highlighted there a lot of language about to the extent, so that's to the extent necessary to support some sort of income qualified housing development. Qualified rehabilitation and income qualified households are also there as definitions. The key is that the legislation provides for housing support up to 120% of area median income as the legislative limit. So those are the key aspects of the program or the legislation that changed related to supporting housing. There were a couple other things that we were able to get done through this legislation as well to make sure, as Jeremiah said, that this is effective and able to be implemented effectively. And just a brief listing of some of those here. MSHDA, a new state partner now, so we work with the Michigan Strategic Fund and the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy currently. MSHDA will now support us on some housing projects. There's new administration, of course, associated with housing projects, but the definition of those things that we can do and pay for have been expanded as well, and the financial resources available to the local Brownfield Authority were expanded as well. So we made sure that we would have the financial resources to run this program as soon as possible. The Payment in lieu of taxes, which is a program you're familiar with. You approve conditionally payment in lieu of taxes for projects in Grand Rapids. That's typically not been able to be leveraged for the Brownfield program. In some instances, it may be now, based on the legislative changes. There is a requirement that a community identify specific housing data. You're all very well aware of the work that's been done, led by Mr. Kilpatrick and his team, so we're well positioned there. We have always struggled a little bit with projects that are in overlapping TIF districts, like our corridor improvement authorities and DDA. We think we sorted some of that out in this legislation. And then I think really importantly, we provided a streamlined pathway to support small projects with grants and loans that I think Grand Rapids is probably best positioned to do in the state. This is where a lot of the data is stuff you've seen already, and this is Mr. Kilpatrick's part of contribution to this presentation. But this slide is showing rental gap estimates. The next one is home ownership, similar data. So just setting a framework of sort of the income ranges we're talking about when we talk about those below 30, 31 to 50%, and so on, area median income. I think the point, one of the main points of this slide is that those lower income ranges below 50% are likely to require more subsidy than the Brownfield program is going to be able to provide on its own. So those are projects that are targeting that income range that are going to need additional support, and Brownfield won't be able to accomplish on its own. But that there's that big segment in the middle there, 51 to 120% of AMI, where households are struggling to afford rent, but there isn't a lot of support for them. So, and need about 2,400 units in the next 4 years, I think, at this point. Here's the same data for home ownership, and I think the point Mr. Kilpatrick is making here is that there's more variables when it comes to home ownership in terms of how much mortgage a household can afford, how much down payment assistance might be available, and so that there's probably opportunities at a broader income range there for home ownership. And again, just the significant demand for about 3,000 home ownership units by 2027. Again, these slides I stole these from Ms. Turkelson. So you've seen these before, just showing the demand for housing and the production of housing. If we're to meet the demand, we need 2,800 units a year. We've been producing just over 500, so we're well short. And the production has largely been in the larger multifamily rental segment as well. So opportunities to diversify the typology of housing. This is similar data, but it's related to projects that the Brownfield Authority has supported. And so you can see here huge skews, obviously, on the left side. The vast majority of projects that the Brownfield Authority has been able to support over the last 5 years has been rental product and primarily market rate rental with some affordable projects in there as well. Very little home ownership. Whether it's affordable or market rate. And the size of units, that graph on the right side of your screen, almost all larger projects with 20 units or more. And the opportunity available through these legislative changes have much broader opportunity than we're seeing on this slide here. So opportunity to diversify the housing type that is supported through Brownfield. More stealing of slides. The magnifying glass was over the zoning requirements in a presentation that you received with the Planning Commission recently. This provides an opportunity to impact another aspect of the complexities associated with getting housing produced. So we're talking about financing here, obviously. I'll do my best to cover these, but generally, whether it's home ownership or rental, there's the cost to build something, operate something, and the revenue necessary to pay for that if it's a rental product, or the sale price if it's a for sale unit. Generally, we're not going to be looking to people to lose money building housing in Grand Rapids, and so there's a subsidy needed. What's laid out here is, on average, lots of variables, but if we're looking at averages, cost to build a home right now, $265,000 minimum. And the cost to purchase that and be able to afford that might be $80,000 a year. And so for those households that are earning less than that, how do we make homeownership accessible to them? There's going to a subsidy at sale is going to be required, and if it's rental, then there's going to be after a reduction in rent. And this new legislation provides opportunities for both of those. I think trying to get at some of the conversation around the incomes here. So, when we're talking about 50, 60, 80, 100, 120% of AMI, we're still talking about families that do have an income or maybe double income, working in our community, still struggling to either access and afford a rental unit or to be able to access the home ownership market in Grand Rapids. So laying out, that a young adult earning $50,000 a year can afford about $1,250 a month for a housing payment, whether that's rental or home ownership. And what's available right now in the market rate side of things is above that. And so whether that's through tax increment financing, subsidizing a rent, or potentially through grants or forgivable loans through the revolving fund, the Brownfield Authority has an opportunity to impact both of those. I think important here to recognize that one thing I said at the Brownfield Authority meeting is that this is this is not an or either or conversation for the Brownfield Authority. A lot of the projects that we've supported are good projects, and we will continue to do that work. Not every project will provide an opportunity to insert some affordability. So projects require reimbursement for traditional brownfield costs, site preparation, demolition, environmental cleanup. We're going to continue to do that. Some projects may require all of the available resources just to get built. But if we assume, as Ryan has laid out here, that each unit on average might produce about $3,000 of capturable tax revenue per year, there's opportunities to take 2 or 3 units to subsidize 1 unit. So there's going to have to be policy conversations about minimum duration, maximum median income, number of units in a development, percentage of units in a development, because those all will go into a formula that can be modified based on the available revenue for a project. So I think that's the part of the conversation that we'll have going forward. And so some questions that were laid out for the Brownfield Authority to consider in terms of policy within the legislation that's been adopted. As I mentioned, the legislation does allow for up to 120% of area median income. Is that the target that we want to aim for? Should there be lower targets? Does homeownership and rental look the same, or might those be different? Should there be a minimum share of affordability before a project can be eligible? Part of that is the administrative work that might be required associated with the project. Is that worth it for 1 or 2 units? Should there be 5 or 10 units minimum? Do we want to talk about a minimum period of affordability? So 10 or 15 years, or are we willing to look at projects for 5 years if that's what can be achieved? Again, looking at rental and for sale, those are very different financial models. So do we try to set those the same or look at different requirements for those? And then, considering within all of those things, how specific do we want to get, which may mean looking at policy more often, or do we want to be more broad and come back less often with policy modifications? So that's the information that was shared with the Brownfield Authority earlier this month. There was good conversation there. There was the establishment of a subcommittee of that board to assist us, and of course, Mr. Kilpatrick will support us through that as well, based on the expertise that he brings to the conversation, as well as connection to other relevant conversations that are going on to make sure that we're all rowing in the same direction to the extent possible. Important to point out, too, that I think what we work under guidelines that our partners at the state currently have, so the MEDC and EGLE. MSHDA will have to do the same thing. I know they're actively working on that, but that is a time constraint for us a little bit. We need to ensure that whatever we do doesn't conflict with anything that MSHDA puts out there, or that if there are certain requirements that they're going to create that we're, both involved in informing those as they're created, but make sure that whatever we do locally results in the greatest efficiency possible for projects. Once we get good direction on policy and prioritization, there will be additional work identifying what work is done in-house, what work might be done not by the Economic Development Office, but others, whether internal to the city or external. There are conversations going on in the community about that with other cities that could be looking at this program as well. And then, of course, we'll have to think about how we administer projects going forward in terms of application materials and timelines and fees and agreements and compliance as well. So with that, I can turn it over for any questions or conversation.
Great. Thanks, Jono. Thanks for all your work on this. I'm happy to see it move forward. When I think about the opportunity, well, first I should also say thank you to our legislators in Lansing who supported passage of this package of bills. And really thinking, I really am appreciative of them thinking creatively about how to use brownfield to help support housing and smaller infill housing, not just in our community, but communities all over the state. And that's the opportunity I see. That's very much aligned with our goals, some of our conversations that we're having with our planning department. How do we use this to support home ownership, wealth generation, support some of our smaller developers to do infill in our neighborhoods, particularly our neighborhoods of focus. And so I'm grateful for the discussion that happened at our Brownfield Authority, and I'm glad to see that a work group is going to work on this. Commissioner Sassi, thank you for serving on that. And then I'll be eager to see what is recommended to move forward. Commissioner Robbins, do you have any questions about this?
I guess just a comment, and of course I don't serve on the Brownfield Authority, but in the first question for consideration, just discussing making the target a smaller range. I know just one thing that seems to be a consistent message is the fact that we can't lose sight of the fact that we need, housing at all price points, and that the 80 to 100% AMI is the biggest gap that we have. And if we neglect that, then it could really make, the cheapest and most affordable housing, it wouldn't improve the situation overall. So that was just kind of a comment I made as I was reading through that, just wanting to make sure that we look at the whole picture, I guess. So that's all.
Yeah. Commissioner?
I'll just add, yes, happy to send in that in the future. We just had our meeting last week. So I won't take too much credit because I haven't done anything yet. But I will say that, we had the opportunity to look at an infill project with an organization, New Development Corp, for their 25-year. Mm-hmm. And while they made it happen, I think there were a lot of things that hopefully with, this package will make it easier and will make it more not maybe having to negotiate so many things, but it will become that easier process. So thank you all for your work to get us up to date, to make sure we're understanding, and I would second that to our legislators. So thanks, Jono.
Yeah, thanks. All right, any final questions or comments, City Manager?
Yeah, I do, Mayor. So with the legislation becoming effective in July and the first opportunity for meetings at the Brownfield Authority and here at EDPT, what is the time frame for moving forward to addressing some of those policy questions before a policy draft is brought back before the commission?
I will. So a subcommittee was established at the Brownfield Authority, and so I'll be working with Ryan. In fact, I'm meeting with him after this to talk about in more details those specific questions. We'll be working to schedule a meeting, and I'm hopeful that it's a couple meetings with that subcommittee in the next couple months before we can come back with a policy framework. So, I would think that October would be the earliest we could come back with a policy framework, pretty well worked out. And I'm hearing that MSHDA probably is along those same timelines for coming out with their guidelines of October. So that would be my expectation at this point, with the understanding also that there are, for projects will require additional resources in order to get evaluated and approved as well, once that policy is effective.
Yes, so the question is that consistent with the expectations of the Brownfield Authority in this body here, the timeframe?
I had to leave the Brownfield meeting early, so I don't know if they talked about timeline. I mean, to me, as soon as we can get this moving, the better. I recognize we have to wait for MSHDA to finalize their guidelines. What I've learned about MSHDA and our other state partners is typically they give us a sense of what those guidelines are before they're finalized, so I would hope that that's the case. I know Ryan is in conversations with them a lot, so we should be able to approve and move forward with our guidelines as soon as those are finalized, in my opinion. I think the sooner we can move on this, the better. 60 to 90 days would be my hope, the maximum amount of time it would take.
All right, so it sounds like consistent with the timeframe Mr. Klooster's outlined.
I would just say, I think the department, talked about, this would be a regular topic. We meet monthly. The subcommittee is made up of a variety of individuals, and I think, what can we start with? What can we control so then we can kind of be ahead? Because as was in that second to the last slide, there are just those decisions to be made. So, yeah. Feel confident that we'll be addressed.
Yeah, thanks. All right, any final questions or comments before I adjourn? That will give us about 12 minutes break before we're back in here at 2 o'clock. All right, I'll adjourn our Economic Development Project team. Thank you, everyone, for your work. Thanks to the Economic Development Department for all of their work, along with our partners, some of them who are still in the room today. Mr. Brown, thanks again. Really appreciate it.